Have you ever been on an empty highway, miles away from the nearest town? The only sounds the hum of your engine and the occasional flutter of wind against the windows. You glance in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, you swear you see headlights. But when you look again, nothing's there. Have you ever felt like someone was following you on a deserted road? What if you were right? What if you were never alone? And what if the road itself harbored secrets no one was meant to uncover? Tonight, we take you down dark roads, into places where reality bends and the impossible creeps into the corners of your mind. This isn't just any road trip. It's a journey into the unknown, where terror isn't always just a thought. It's something that waits in the shadows. We'll unravel 3 chilling real-life highway stories, each leaving behind a question. What happens when you drive too far off the beaten path? And what does the highway hide from us that we aren't meant to see? Not all highways are what they seem. Some roads carry a dark past, hidden beneath the miles of asphalt and the quiet hum of traffic. One such road is known to locals as the Bloody Road to Nowhere. On the surface, it appears to be like any other highway, wide, flat, and unremarkable. But it has a history that few dare to speak of. This stretch of road, stretching for miles, is infamous for strange occurrences, eerie sightings, and a dark legacy of violence. Some say the road itself is cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who met an untimely end. For years, travelers have passed through, only to find their fate twisted by the road's sinister reputation. The highway, stretching endlessly through empty woods, looks desolate. No signs of life for miles, just a seemingly normal path cutting through the quiet. But if you were to stop, really look, you might notice something strange. The occasional flash of bloodstains that never seem to wash away. Abandoned vehicles left on the side of the road with no explanation, and the feeling that someone, or something, is watching from the trees. It's a place where the past is never truly gone. And some say, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the echoes of what happened. It was on a cold, moonless night that a family, unaware of the road's dark history, found themselves traveling down this very highway. The car, a simple sedan, rumbled along, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The kids were asleep in the back, while the parents tried to make it to their next destination. But as the miles ticked by, a feeling began to settle in, a sense of unease that neither parent could shake. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no signs of life. Nothing but trees, the occasional abandoned shack, and the sound of their car's tires on the blacktop. And then, without warning, the car jolted, a flat tire. The parents exchanged uneasy glances. "It's just a flat," the father said, trying to calm the situation. But something didn't feel right. The silence around them seemed oppressive. The children, usually so restless during car rides, remained eerily still in the back seat. It was as if the entire world had fallen quiet. No birds, no crickets, not even the wind seemed to stir. As the father began to change the tire, a strange sensation lingered in the air. It was as if they were being watched, as though eyes were peering at them from the darkness beyond the trees. The sound of soft footsteps, barely audible, but unmistakable, echoed from the woods. He froze, trying to dismiss it, but there it was again, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling. The father turned quickly, expecting to see an animal, but the woods were empty, or at least they seemed to be. Then the whispers began, soft, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all directions. The mother, who had been sitting in the car, suddenly turned pale. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The father, not wanting to alarm the children, nodded curtly. "It's nothing, just the wind," he said, though he wasn't so sure himself. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more frantic. That's when they saw it, a figure in the woods running toward them. At first, it was just a blur, a shadow moving in the trees, but as it drew closer, it became clear. A man, or what looked like a man, covered in blood, running wildly toward the car. His clothes were torn, his face twisted in terror, eyes wide in a silent scream. But just as quickly as the figure appeared, it vanished into the trees, leaving nothing behind but a trail of bloodstains in the underbrush. The parents were frantic. The mother screamed for the father to drive, to get them out of there. They tore down the road, the engine roaring as they fled. But as they looked in the rearview mirror, their hearts stopped. There, standing in the distance, was the bloodied figure once again. Only this time, he was much closer, and with each glance, he seemed to get nearer, his face contorted in an expression of pure agony. They drove faster, barely glancing at the road ahead, but every time they looked back, the figure was there, just behind them, watching them. Then, as suddenly as it had all started, the figure disappeared from the rearview mirror, leaving the family in a suffocating silence. The road, once so quiet, now felt alive with dread. That night, the family made it to the nearest town. Their car was still running, but they weren't the same. They didn't speak much, and their eyes betrayed the terror they had felt. It wasn't until later, after they shared their experience with the locals, that they learned the truth about the road. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was something that had happened before, many times. The bloody road to nowhere, it seemed, was infamous for the gruesome murders that had taken place over the years. Some say the victims' spirits still lingered, trapped in a never-ending loop, unable to escape the horrors they endured. And the bloodstains, those were real remnants of a dark history that had never fully been erased. But perhaps the most chilling detail of all was the way the spirits seemed to interact with the living. Those who traveled the road too late at night often found themselves facing something far darker than they could ever have imagined. Could the road itself be cursed? Was it truly the spirits of the murdered who sought vengeance? Or was the road itself the cause of the madness? Some believe that once you've driven down that highway, you can never truly leave, because the road has a way of making you part of its history, whether you want to be or not. Sometimes, when you're on the road, you'll find yourself pulling into a rest stop, just a quick break before continuing your journey. But not all rest stops are created equal. Some have a way of making you feel uneasy, as though something is watching, waiting. And there are places you stumble upon where time seems to stand still, where the darkness feels heavier and the air colder. This was one such place. The rest stop seemed harmless enough at first glance. A lone bench under a dim light, a faded sign marking the stop, cracked pavement that hadn't been repaved in years. But there was something off about it, the kind of off that you can't quite put your finger on. The flickering street lamp cast shadows that seemed too deep, and the cold that seemed to seep from the ground felt unnatural. It was the kind of place you wouldn't want to be after dark, but for this weary traveler, it was their only option. They pulled in, hoping for a quick rest before hitting the road again. The air was damp, the moon barely peeking through the cloud cover. As the car engine died down, the stillness settled in around them, only the distant hum of the highway breaking the silence. And then, an odd feeling crept in, a sense that they were not alone. Looking around, the traveler took in their surroundings. There was a small restroom building, the kind with faded walls and peeling paint. They stepped inside, hoping to find some relief from the growing sense of unease. But as they pushed the door open, something was immediately off. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. As they stepped deeper into the bathroom, the mirror caught their eye. It was an old, tarnished thing, the reflection hazy, as if it had been clouded by years of neglect. But as they stood there, washing their hands, something caught their attention in the mirror. The figure behind them, just a flicker at first, wasn't theirs. It was someone else, a figure they hadn't seen before, standing behind them in the reflection. No one else was in the room. What would you do if you saw someone standing behind you in a room, but when you turned, there was no one there? A cold sweat began to form on the traveler's brow. They spun around, heart racing, but the bathroom was empty. Just the eerie quiet and the hum of the flickering lights. And yet, the image in the mirror remained, a distorted figure that seemed to fade as they turned to face it. The traveler quickly left the restroom, but as they stepped into the night air, the sense of unease grew heavier. A shiver ran down their spine as they glanced over their shoulder. Had they imagined it? Or was something truly wrong with this place? They decided it was time to go. Enough rest, they thought. But as they approached their car, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. The hairs on the back of their neck stood up, and then they heard it, a soft voice coming from the darkness around them. A whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me." They froze. The voice came from deep within the shadows, from somewhere just outside the light's reach. The traveler turned toward the car, trying to reach for the door, but their feet felt frozen to the ground. The whispers grew louder, clearer. "Help me. Please." It was coming from every direction now, as if the entire rest stop was alive with unseen voices. Desperate to leave, the traveler scrambled for the door, but every time they tried, something held them back. The rest stop seemed to have a grip on them, as if the place itself didn't want them to go. The shadows closed in, creeping just out of sight. Was it their imagination, or was the rest stop alive with something far more dangerous? Finally, they managed to start the car and speed off, leaving the eerie rest stop behind. But the question lingered in their mind. What had they really encountered there? As they later learned, the rest stop had a grim history, one that few cared to speak of. It had once been the site of a violent robbery, a brutal attack on travelers who had stopped for a quick break. The victims were never found, their bodies left to rot in the wilderness, their spirits trapped in the place where they died. The spirits of those who died there were said to haunt the rest stop, their cries for help still echoing through the air. The flickering lights, the cold spots, the voices in the dark. These were not just coincidences, but the restless souls of the murdered, forever trapped in the place where they had been killed. Could the restless spirits be the reason you should never stop on that highway after dark? Is the rest stop a place of refuge, or a place where something far darker waits for those who dare to linger too long? Some roads, some places, are best left unexplored. It was a cold night, the kind where the air seems to bite your skin. The sky above was a blanket of deep black, and the only thing that seemed alive was the stretch of highway beneath the car's tires. The road ahead was empty, the occasional flash of headlights cutting through the dark, but everything else was silence. Not a soul in sight. Only the dark expanse of the open road, stretching endlessly to nowhere. No towns, no gas stations, just miles of barren asphalt. As the driver pushed the gas pedal a little harder, trying to reach the next town before the chill of night completely settled in, something caught the corner of his eye. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow moving in the wind. But then he saw her, a lone figure, barely visible in the dim light of his headlights, standing by the side of the road. She stood motionless, her figure casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch toward him as if it too was waiting for something. The highway was desolate, no houses nearby, no other cars. Just her, standing, almost waiting. For a moment, the driver hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake. But what choice did he have? He was miles from anywhere, and the night was too long. As he drove closer, he couldn't help but feel an unease crawl under his skin. Something about the scene felt wrong. The figure, now more clearly visible, didn't seem to move at all. Her eyes, wide, almost unnaturally so, stared straight ahead, fixed on nothing. Her clothes were neat, too neat for someone who had been standing out in the cold for so long. A clean, white dress, unmarred by the dirt or wind, like she'd just stepped out of a place far from here. He slowed down, his mind racing. Was she lost? In need of help? It was strange, yes, but maybe it wasn't too out of the ordinary for a late-night traveler on a desolate road. But the more he stared at her, the more her presence unsettled him. It wasn't just the cold night that made him feel this way. It was her, the way she stood completely still, the oddness in the way she was dressed, perfectly pristine, as if time itself hadn't touched her. And her eyes, those eyes, wide and unblinking, staring into the dark void ahead. Was she simply a lost soul, or was there something darker at play here? The driver couldn't say for certain, but deep down, a voice inside him whispered that this wasn't a chance encounter. There was something off, something that didn't belong. As he neared the figure, his foot pressing on the brake, he watched her every move. But just before he could reach the place where she stood, something strange happened. The figure, as if dissolved into the night, vanished without a trace. No step backward, no movement at all, just gone. And just as suddenly, the road ahead was empty once more. There was nowhere for her to go. No turn-offs, no cars, not even a road leading off into the dark woods. Just the endless stretch of highway behind him. He stopped, heart pounding, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Had he imagined it? Was it just a trick of the light? Or had something truly strange happened? He waited, the quiet oppressive, before the chill of uncertainty settled in once again. Before he could even make sense of what had just happened, he heard it, faint in the distance, a soft scream, almost as if the very air itself was calling for him. Was it her? Or was something else at play on this forsaken road? The driver, now visibly shaken, continued his journey, his mind heavy with confusion. The memory of the woman stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. What could it mean? A few days later, while stopping in a small town nearby, he learned something he hadn't expected. Over a cup of coffee at a diner, the conversation turned to the strange things that happened on that particular stretch of highway. A local overheard him and nodded solemnly. "You saw her, didn't you?" they asked. He felt a chill run down his spine as the local spoke the words he had been dreading. "She's been seen around these parts for years. We call her the vanishing hitchhiker. You're not the first to see her, and you won't be the last." They told him the story of a woman who had died in a terrible car crash on that very stretch of road years ago. A young woman on her way to a wedding. Her life cut short before she could reach her destination. The locals whispered that her spirit never left that road. They said she still appeared to drivers, only to disappear moments later, just before they could offer help. That night, so many years ago, her car had lost control in the rain, crashing violently into the guardrails. She was killed instantly. But now, her spirit wandered the road, searching for something. Perhaps answers. Or perhaps something far more tragic than anyone knew. Was it a trick of the mind, or had he truly seen her? A ghost trapped between two worlds, walking the very road where her life had ended so abruptly. What really waits for us on the highways we drive every day? And why does it seem like some roads never let go of those who travel them? But what is it about these roads that draws out the unexplainable? The eerie echoes, the inexplicable sights, and the chilling encounters that leave travelers questioning their sanity. Could it be the spirits of the past, or something darker? Something that's been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? Or perhaps it's something we're only beginning to understand, an unseen force that lies just beyond the veil of reality, stretching across the very roads we travel. Do you believe in these kinds of things happening on the open road? Or is there another explanation, one that we haven't yet uncovered? Maybe these roads are haunted, cursed, or maybe, just maybe, they have stories to tell that we can barely begin to comprehend. If you've survived these tales, then hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more terrifying encounters. If you think you have the courage to uncover more horrors, then join us next time. But for now, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think these stories are really about? Ghosts, curses, or something darker? And if you dare, share your own highway horror stories with us. Who knows? Your experience might be the next one we uncover. Remember, the road isn't always as empty as it seems. Stay safe and drive carefully.